That said, Puppet is very squarely in the DevOps world. DevOps, who's read like the Phoenix Project?
I tried to read a little bit.
Tried to, didn't like it.
It's a lot of like issue in the first half of the chapter, like they keep having issue. I kind of skip all the way to the back when I happy part.
So I mean, but that's the story that Puppet sells, and we talk as we get as a bigger company. It's becoming a bigger company. We're talking more and more to devs. I mean, I was at a POC today. It's all dev types, and the devs are trying to figure out how do we make this handoff to the people that are operationalizing what we write more efficient. And some companies have written their own tools around this. So I mean, totally custom. It's almost like Puppet, but it works in their environment, and no one knows it. You can't hire anybody that knows how to do that. You know, others and most are doing manual. So they've got run books. They've got people that are really smart and have been doing it for 10 or 15 years. Isn't any of that sounding familiar? Right. I mean, that's mostly what people are doing. So, does anyone not know what Puppet is?
I would like to know how we are using Jenkins today.
Using what?
Jenkins.
Jenkins.
What is different among the companies?
So how does that compare? Yeah, with continuous integration type products like Jenkins or Bamboo or anything else. But does anyone not even know what Puppet is? Couple. Okay. So I'm going to spend just a little bit of time talking about what is Puppet. I'm going to do demo, and then whatever questions you guys have, I'm going to answer for you. Yes, sir.
Are you finding that in those kind of system system groups actually handing over some of the power to the devs so they have more control of the still very silent?
I'd still say it's pretty siloed, especially in this part of the world, like in the central U.S. I'd say it's still pretty siloed. I mean, even continuous integration, I find to be something everybody talks about, and few people are doing it. Yeah. But everybody says they want to do. And then you get further down that, like continuous deployment and all that, I mean, forget about it. So that's, and I even my partners on the West Coast say the same thing. You know, the very most avant-garde IT shops are doing it, but it's a tough thing to do to break those. And it's about power. It's like you said, like, are they giving up the power? No one's going to say that. Definitely not. Whoa, PowerPoint just crashed. Don't send. Let me kill my hip chat. What happened there? I know, my guys back in Portland would be like, they're using like Open Office on a Mac that's running their own version of the Linux kernel. Yeah, they're for real. I'm a poser. Okay. Puppet's been around for a long time. So our founder is a technical founder. He's an engineer. He's still an engineer. His name is Luke Knies. He was a primary contributor to CF Engine. Has anyone heard of CF Engine? CF Engine is like the grandfather of configuration automation. So when you think about who's in this space, it's Puppet, it's Chef. Those are the big pure plays. Ansible, SaltStack, and then you get into like the big, what I consider like the IBM-ish type, you know, like BMC has DevOps type stuff. CF Engine is the grandfather of all these things. And when I say grandfather, I mean they had a DSL, you know, declarative type approach as opposed to scripting type of model. So Luke in 2005 segued from being a contributor to CF Engine as an open source project and founded Puppet. And what he did was the first permutation of Puppet was really as a consultancy to do what we would now call DevOps. But back in 2005, we wouldn't have called it DevOps. And then that segued into a product, you know, that we now know as Puppet Enterprise and Puppet Open Source. So Puppet is both an open source project, it's a number of projects, but Puppet is sort of the vanilla umbrella term. And then the commercial side of it is called Puppet Enterprise. Okay? So today, you know, we're the biggest of this pure play, okay? You know, hundreds of millions of nodes under management and, you know, lots of partnerships, lots of venture capital, you know, $80, $90 million raised, that sort of thing. Okay. these are the ways that people have solved this problem before Puppet came along. Okay, so golden images, you know, why not just take, here, this is what my web tier looks like. I'm going to make a golden image out of that. And then I get this golden image problem. How do I manage those golden images over time? And I keep finding these corner cases where the golden image plus some changes is my new golden image for this new thing. So golden images doesn't scale very well. Custom scripts and manual configuration is mainly the way people solve this problem. This problem being, how do you do systems administration? How do you do operations? Okay, I'm going to skip through some of this stuff. Now, Puppet works across, what we basically do is we provide you a way to do declarative configuration automation so that you specify the desired state config for a machine or a node. That node might be a compute node, like a Solaris machine or a Linux machine. It could be, we work with Arista switches, Cisco networking gear, F5 load balancers, and then we'll start to move into things like storage arrays and get to the point where you can actually declaratively describe an entire application landscape. The networking, the storage, the compute, all of that stuff within a configuration language that you can then put into things like source control and manage in the same way that devs are used to managing source code. So infrastructure as code is a DevOps principle that Puppet enables. When you think about the things that we manage, it's these kinds of things: users, groups, files, packages, services, okay? Abstractly, so that when you create the Puppet code, and I'll show you kind of what some examples of this look like, you can deploy it to all these different platforms and it just works. So I don't need to know that in Linux, in Solaris, it's package management is with package add and all this other kind of stuff. It's Yum on RHEL, it's RPG on something else, it's Chocolatey on Windows, it's et cetera. I don't need to know that stuff. I use Puppet as a common denominator across all of them, okay? So Puppet, broadly speaking, you have two different phases. The first is the definition of your desired state configuration, so writing Puppet code. And the second is the automated application of that Puppet code to nodes over time. So I write the Puppet code, I say, this node should be a web server. What does that mean to me? It means it should be Tomcat, a certain version. I should have IP tables. These ports should be open. I should have NTP and sudoers and all the stuff that makes the Tomcat server for me in my environment. I define that, the definition side of it, the creation of Puppet code. And then over time, the automation is that we have an agent that sits on those nodes that constantly checks in with the master and says, what should I look like? The agent sees what it does look like, and if it differs, that means there's drift. We remediate that drift back to whatever standard you have. So what Puppet isn't is like with scripting, it's normally a provisioning type thing. You know, it's a one and done type of thing. And then, but you don't have the management over time. Does anybody not get that? Okay. What's that?
I don't get it.
Okay. So when you set up when you have a new engineer come in, a new software engineer, right? He says, how do I set up my dev environment? How do you do that? Talk to an expert.
Or a document that they have.
That's exactly right. Or if you're really progressive, you have something like Boxen or something, and it captures what your environment should look like. Oh, you're supposed to have Git, and you're supposed to have this version of this, and you're this version of that. So, but then what happens 3 months later? Now you've been using it, things have changed, you've either kept up or you've not kept up, okay? Puppet keeps you up. Puppet, as things change, we no longer use Tomcat version X, we use X+1. Next time your Tomcat servers check in with the master, they automatically upgrade themselves. It's user counts, it's software packages, it's services, it's files, it's every kind of thing that you can think about that you manage from a sysadmin perspective, you can model in Puppet.
So that's what version X, right?
Mm-hmm.
And 7. So we know all that and we take all that based on the. So as far as system admins, they have which one has higher? The higher is the IDE that drives the version of Java.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
It can be, if that's the way you model it.
And it depends, right? Because in Java, this week, the way we manage it is we take that data, put it into Tomcat area.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that, Puppet will reach out to that to get those jobs.
What is
Are you working with, our question is, are you working with the POM file? Because the IDE
No.
uses the POM file, right?
That's-
For example, I give you some context, right? So development, I developed a, full Java, huge Java, right?
Mm-hmm.
It has multiple one file, for example.
Yeah.
Right? Or a year, for example, right? So it uses JDK 8, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But my Oracle server is running JDK 7,
Mm-hmm.
right? It uses a different JDK version,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or even it have to have its own, let's say, WLSD, script, right?
Mm-hmm.
Web logic.
For WebLogic.
Yeah, it's service logic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you capture all this? Do we have to take the burden of telling where is my file that is like the JDK version? And for the Oracle installation, it has a separate, its own, algorithm.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you differentiate?
So these are separate levels of abstraction.
Okay.
When you're talking POM files and stuff,
Yeah,
that's build. That's totally separate. Now,
I'm not talking about the installation, like, still guilty of doing. And
mm-hmm.
on my machine, I have 2 because depending on the project, one I have to use Uno, and then the other one I have to use.
Mm-hmm.
They quote this at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So next time that you have to do this manual.
Which has the
Yeah.
INI file dictates that, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I was saying, one of them and it's configured than the other one.
Mm-hmm.
So, and on one machine, I have both versions.
Mm-hmm.
But I configured it manually myself and go through the trial error of bringing it up.
Mm-hmm.
In even the IT people,
Mm-hmm.
IT.
Right.
We have an IT.
Right.
But
They give it to this is the application development.
no, the IT is responsible for configuring our machine.
Mm-hmm. Right. They can only get you so far.
Yeah, they.
Configuring ID.
Right.
So it comes
No one-
back to
no one does
developers
that.
again
No one does it.
to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's why we have distributed, even though in the 21st century, distributed.
Mm-hmm.
To be in the 80s, no, you could do everything yourself before this access.
Right.
Now, size of specializations and communication barriers,
Right.
So not to deviate though, right? So is that use case applicable here?
It actually is.
So
It
if
is.
a developer coming into a new team, the
Yeah.
new environment.
Yes.
Whichever flavor of project you pick, you will have a separate set of ID.
Yes. Now, I will say this. That use case is probably better solved by something like Boxen or something. However, like Boxen, it's like a,
DOXIN?
yeah, Boxen, EN, I think, which is more around setting up workstations. So like
Microsoft has a CCM.
right. Puppet's domain is more on like the server side. So production, it's like this. Production, totally for sure, 100%. QA, totally 100% for sure. Now, the closer you get to dev, the further away from the sweet spot that you get. However, I'm trying to think how to best connect the dots here. Let me do this. Don't make me forget that.
Well, I didn't mean to undermine the importance of the Puppet or Chef. They do a good job. They do fantastic.
Thank you.
I mean, even open source.
Ansible, SaltStack.
Oh, there's so many people.
Yeah.
He asked the question, you said, when you get a new person, that's what.
Yeah. And the reason though is so it's still valid. So here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to do for you guys.
No, it's doing a job. No, it's just cloud because yeah, extremely. Yeah.
So you know Puppet. Yeah. So chime in if I'm missing something. So here's what I want to do. I want to back up and let's talk total fundamentals about Puppet. Okay. Now, let me draw something. Sorry for the person. Here's a problem with scripting. If you're in a Windows environment, you know PowerShell. And if you're a Linux person, you know Bash. And if you're running in Solaris or something like that, you might still be Bash, you might be T-Shell or T-Shell or something like that. And then you can't get out of there. I mean, if you're a PowerShell guru, you are not a Bash guru, and vice versa. And it's nothing to do with PowerShell or Bash. They're both puddles, right? Does anyone disagree with that? So what Puppet tries to do is say, well, what if we could have this ubiquitous administration that would work everywhere? Okay. So we said, okay. What's the common denominator across things? Like what do we want to do? We want to manage things. What are those things called? They're resources, users, packages, files, and services. So we have a resource abstraction layer. Okay. In there, and this gentleman just mentioned it, we've got at the top types, at the bottom providers. Is anybody not familiar with the JDBC, ODBC kind of concept of a standard API, JDBC, ODBC, and a data-specific implementation of the provider that sits underneath there? Same exact concept. So, type, user, package, service, file, firewall. I mean, 3, 4, 5 dozen of these. Okay. Providers like package. Okay. RPG, EM, sorry. Okay. I install, on and on. All these chocolatey for Windows. Okay. When you write Puppet code, you are operating at this level. Okay. So this is you. That's what you know. There's a domain-specific language here that you know. It's not procedural at all. It's declarative, and I'll show you what it looks like. Down here is an agent. So the agents, we've got agents for Red Hat, for Ubuntu, for SLES, for AIX, for Solaris, etc. The agents interpret these generic calls into platform-specific calls. So now I can write code for RHEL and deploy it on Plex, because the agent is going to translate the generic type into the specific platform-specific implementation provider. Like you mentioned, you might say, okay, user, we've got things like user add and all the generics. What if I have my own custom identity prompt? I've written it. Well, a guy like this guy can come and say, well, why don't I write a provider for ABC Corp's user admin so that when someone deploys Puppet code in my environment that uses my proprietary IDM, my provider, my custom provider, will work. But the person writing the code doesn't need to know anything about that provider. In the same way that I allow a Windows admin to administer Linux machines, I can allow someone who knows how to use standard user admin to use custom user admin. They don't know anything about it. That's the magic of Puppet.
Nice decoupling.
Yeah. I mean, so this is fundamental Puppet, so let me show you what I mean. So I'm on just a machine that has Puppet. So Puppet, the Puppet executable has what we call faces, subcommands. So Puppet resource is a way for me to play with that resource abstraction layer. So Puppet resource user, for instance, excuse me. It doesn't matter what the OS is here. What happens is it discovers all the users on the machine and gives me the results back in Puppet code. This is what Puppet code looks like. Just like this. Type user, name of user, and then metadata about the user. Okay? I can do the same thing, Puppet, let me clear this. Puppet resource service. Yeah, but I may not know how to do that. Like, you know, who's ever jumped on an unfamiliar Linux or Unix distro? You know, I used to be a Solaris admin, and then I got hired to be an AIX admin. I may as well never touch Solaris. Okay? Someone says, how do you kill a plant? Who knows? I mean, right? So same thing here. I get the exact same results back in here. Now, what if I don't know how to install software here? Okay? do I have tree? Okay, I don't have tree here. I don't know how to install it. Okay, well with Puppet, apply, E, inline. I'm just going to execute some Puppet code inline. Package, generic type. Oops, I'm going to quote this. Package, P-A-C-K-A-G-E, package. Tree, semicolon. Ensure, installed. Close this, comma, close. All right. It's optional. I could have taken it off. It's a habit. So
Is it optional?
it totally is optional. Yeah.
Because everything I've seen is not optional. The trailing comma is.
Oh, I guarantee it's optional. Yeah, if I take it off. Now, so what just happened there? Two things. I just ran it again to prove that you're wrong. And
Your talks are wrong.
So, why do you hate DevOps? Now, the first thing, all I did was I took exactly the code that you just saw. You know, it's inline here. It's not indented and everything, but it's the exact same thing. It's type package. Name of the package I want is tree. The parameter I want to make sure it's installed, ensure present. I just ran on the command line. Maybe I don't.
You take another parameter, put a comma. You have to do another parameter.
You can keep doing that. The point I'm trying to make here is I may not know that Yum even exists. I may not know that I'm supposed to use Yum here. I can use RPM if I want on Red Hat. But with Puppet, I don't have to worry about it. I can do the same thing with services. I can start and stop services with Puppet. Now, you don't typically do this on the command line like this. You declare it in your Puppet manifest. But the point is, you use this generic approach, and whatever I'm doing, now, I'm not saying you don't have to know some platform-specific stuff. That would be kind of crazy. If you don't know how to if you've never heard of an application server, much less JBoss, and you go to try to automate its configuration, you're gonna have a bad day.
Yeah.
To use, you know. But Homebrew is a provider we have, so if I want to install software on my machine, my Mac, I can use Brew, or I can use Puppet, exactly that same command on my Mac, and install it through Homebrew unchanged, because Homebrew is a provider that's below the line, but I need to have Homebrew. Do you see what I'm saying? Same thing. So Chocolatey on Windows, Yum here, I install on AIX, Package Add on Solaris, but I don't get, if I just know one of those platforms as a person trying to get a job, I don't have a whole lot of scalability. I'm I'm a Solaris guy, I'm a Linux guy, I'm an AIX guy or gal.
So the abstraction is cross-platform. But how far does it go? Is it true cross-platform abstraction?
Yes. Next question.
All right.
No. So, no.
And
I mean.
And then they could have the scenarios where.
Not that it doesn't work, but where certain patterns need to be applied. So, for instance, let's look at. So I'm going to go just back a step real quick. So earlier we did Puppet resource user, and we said, oh, there's all of our users. So I said, okay. what do I really want the root user. What does it look like? Okay, I want to manage this user. So I'm going to use Puppet to generate some Puppet code that I'm going to use as a basis for managing the root user or a service account or whatever. .pp, that's a Puppet extension that usually means the Puppet manifest. So now I've got, that's what I've got. That's Puppet code. I can do Puppet apply. I can run that. Now, nothing's going to happen here because Puppet adheres to this principle called idempotency. But it looks at the state that you say it should be in, as defined right there, looks at the state that you are in, and if it's that way, it does nothing at an attribute by attribute level. So here it says the root user should be there. Yep, it's there. It should have this comment. It does. Okay? So I say, well, I don't really care about all these things. So maybe don't care about. Okay, maybe that's what I care about. Save that. Time goes on. Dave comes along, new guy. I'm like, I hate this password. Okay, sharing. Oops. Okay, way too short. Okay, God damn it. Hold on, I can't type. I'm going to change the password. Okay, so now I've got a bad password here. Now Puppet is in the background always. It's not just a provision time, it's like checking in every 30 minutes, every hour, whatever you set it to. Now, with Puppet apply, I can just kick this off manually. Now, since this is modeled in this language, I can do this unique thing. I can simulate what would happen when the next time the Puppet agent ran. So what would happen? It runs, and it says there's a problem. There's a type called user. There's a specific user root. Its password is not the same as the password that is specified here. Now, what if I did something else? What if I change the definition? I go in here and I say, we used to like bash, now we like corn shell. Now, the system has a difference and the new definition has a difference. I would expect that I could see, again, I'm simulating. Now I'm going to see both of those things. So if I run this without simulation, it's going to remediate those two things. It's going to change the shell. It's going to change the path. I had to pick a shell like I normally pick C shell. I don't have K shell on here. There we go. Okay, so now it's going to run. It did two things. It remediated the password back to the beginning password. So it took the drift away. We call that drift. And it changed the shell. So if I grab root from SC password, and it changed it to C shell right there. So if I do this, manage my Puppet, it's going to run again. It's going to see that there's a change. And now I got managed by Puppet there. So this is a simplistic example. Does anybody questions about this before I move to more realistic? Oh, I just changed it so that the comment was managed by Puppet.
Okay. So now if you don't have root access to the machine.
For this use case, you have to have root. Puppet can also run as non-root. So a lot of places they'll run web servers and stuff out of service accounts, and you can run a Puppet agent out of a service account as well, but then it constrains what you can do. So you can only deal with ports over 1024. You can only deal with things that are in places that you have read-write access to, that kind of thing. So you can still do it, but you're constrained. You can't use package tools, like Yum requires root. So there's constraints, but you can do it.
Have you seen any places where they actually take the root password away and actually they're actually managing system configuration, like checking it out, checking it back in, and then now Puppet actually so that actually there's no actually access to the machine, it's all managed like
Well, no, I think for sure. I mean, that's every Puppet customer, because what we do.
So they've taken root password away.
Now, the whole root password thing and the whole idea of how do you access privileged accounts and stuff like that, frankly, that's a domain to itself. That's an IDM domain. Dell has a product for that from Quest called Privilege QAS, Quest Access. I forget what it's called, but the whole idea of like when I shell to a machine, I do it as myself. I check out root, and I go to this web interface and it gives me this one-time, almost like a one-time root path. That's a whole different domain. But all the other stuff, you know, the presence of certain software, the absence of certain things, you know, the starting and stopping of service, all the other kind of stuff,
Yeah.
totally.
So yeah, so maybe a different advance. So basically, you commit your code to, and back in it, all of it's actually kept in like the version.
Git,
You
yep,
have a trigger on that. So when you commit your changes, actually, it will actually, those changes make sense of it. And actually, you never have to actually log on to the system. So your audit trail is always sitting in your Git repository, the version repository in the history.
totally.
Have you seen anyone do that advanced?
To a certain extent. So that's where you say, well, who's also doing continuous integration and continuous deployment, you know, just continuous delivery in general. That's the nirvana. And what they do in the Puppet world, all this Puppet code. And so it's a good segue into sort of the next level. This is just showing you guys, well, what do we mean by resource abstraction? Now, let's talk about more sophisticated use cases. SE Puppet Labs. Okay, so we've got this idea of modules, okay? So if you go to, I don't want to kill that, forge.puppetlabs.com, 3,200 modules here. So you say, I want to manage, well, let's pick one of these guys, Apache, pretty common. You know, I can install this module, and then I can just apply this module, and I don't have to write any Puppet code. I just have to configure this module. So the module has an interface. All the Puppet modules do. So for instance, you know, this is the minimal Puppet code that I write, which simply says configure Apache with all defaults. Okay, well, I don't like that. I want to specify parameters. Okay, fine. I can parameterize this. You know, I can set up vhosts. You know, I can set up, you know, et cetera, all the things that you might imagine that you might want to manage from an Apache perspective. It's encapsulated within this module. All I need to do is install the module and then apply it to nodes. And it'll abstract away for me all the nuances of how to do this. Now, when I do that, I end up with this set of modules that support a given set of nodes. Okay, we call that an environment. So an environment might be production, for instance, or it might be application A, or division foo, or whatever. Okay. Now, these are modules. Yeah. So what we were looking at earlier, we were looking at specific DSL statements like Puppet resource user, and then we went up a level and we said, well, what if we took an entire user and we created a manifest, which had a single resource declaration for the user root, and then we said, well, what's the next level of the abstraction up? It's a module, which contains potentially multiple manifests and a bunch of other stuff. Which
all those things stored in a particular path or directory or
so we have, just like we have a search path in our shells, we have a module path in Puppet. So in our case, we have a base module path and an environment-specific path. So base module path are common, that's shared across all environments, and then the environment-specific is for a given environment. Like again, like production, or the application of what you call your environments and what they mean to you is up to you. Now, in these modules, when you go to the Forge here, these are all what we call component modules. Just like in Unix, it's like do one thing, do it awesome. That's what these modules do. It's a module to do NTP. It's a module to do sudoers. It's a module to do SSH keys. Whatever it is, it does that one thing. So those look like, for instance, like this. Here's a module that manages Tomcat, a very simplistic management of Tomcat. It uses 3 types. Package, make sure that the Tomcat package is installed to a specific version. You know, make sure that there's relationship between these resources. Make sure that we don't try to start the service before we install the package. So there's a relationship there. The service, it's called Tomcat on this particular platform. Make sure that it's running. Make sure that it's part of the init scripts, and that it has a certain name. Okay, I'll get to what this variable thing means in just a second. Certain files, you know, configuration files, directories, etc., that are required to be present and set up in a certain way. So this only does Tomcat. Now, if I
Yeah, so you need to record service. So service, Microsoft people might understand service, but Unix people don't.
really? Well, we would say process.
In it.
Yes.
You were saying it needs to be part of Unix,
Yes.
right? So that's a different legal, right?
But it's a good example, though, right?
So you use the token service.
Yes.
That's the thing which is driving.
That's the abstraction. Because on Windows, that'll do one thing, and on Linux and Unix, it'll do something different.
So there's no keywords in the puppet. I think Chef is
Types.
pretty close to type, yeah.
Yes. Chef is way worse.
He doesn't want to, but I think they're very close.
Yes. They're both Northwestern companies based on Ruby. I mean, don't get me started. Now, you mentioned, I forget how you put it, but something like, well, okay, is it really like you just write one thing and you can run it anywhere? And the answer is no, because when you look at something like this, package, Tomcat, ensure present, what if this package from distro to distro is different? You know what I mean? Like some things are, like on Red Hat, tree's called tree. What if it's called, you know, something different, just a different name on Ubuntu or SLES or whatever, okay, different name. Well, that's where these parameters come in. So what we do is we create this thing here. This inherits Tomcat params. And we say, here's a new concept called facts, okay? So one of the things that the agent does is it catalogs the node that it's running on and keeps track of a bunch of metadata about it. Like, what operating system am I? What version of Puppet am I? What network am I attached to? How much memory do I have? I mean, just all that kind of stuff. There's like 80, 90 different things that we keep track of out of the box. We can consume those in these manifests. And here you can see, this is one of the few programmatic constructs we have in the DSL, which is a case statement. It's like select. And we're saying, look at the fact called OS family. On this one, the value is Red Hat. Okay?
This is very
Oh, can you not see it?
yeah. Oh,
It is pretty hard to see. Or is it like all or nothing?
Maybe change your banner real quick here.
Oh, God.
yeah. Take the glitter away. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm glad you said that.
Yeah.
So, it's so romantic. So we're looking at this thing called OS family, and what I was gonna let me put here. So I mentioned that the agent, part of the agent is this thing called factor. It keeps track of all this details about this machine. So if I look, what are those details? These are it. It's a bunch of name value pairs where the value is either a simple string or it can be structured data. So for instance, I can see here's the domain this thing's attached to. Okay. If I want, somewhere in here, there's OS family. So if I want to do here, factor OS family, the value is Red Hat. If I want to know factor OS, that's structured data. It's actually CentOS. It's in the Red Hat family. In this case, the release, major, minor, etc. So so I'm keeping track of all this information. Everything that is in here is consumable within those manifests. So when I look at that params, I'm saying, let's figure out what version, what operating system family I'm on. And this particular module will support SUSE, Debian, and Red Hat. So he mentioned, well, do you really write it once and run it anywhere? Not really. You kind of have to know something about the platform you're on. You have to know, for instance, Tomcat's called TC server on one thing and Tomcat on the other. And this is the kind of pattern that you implement when you want to deal with that sort of platform-specific variance. Does that make sense?
I was still hoping David,
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking it loud, okay?
Say that last part again?
I'm thinking it loud.
Okay.
I'm talking about, thinking it loud, right? So browsers, this is how we handle the browser work. When we do web code,
Mm-hmm.
web apps, right? So I was hoping that the agent could handle it. Yeah, it's a smart agent running, you're handling this, you're handing it off to the agent.
Yes.
Right, the layer, right?
Yes.
So the agents know the OS. Might as well know it's Red Hat. The params are same. Keywords are still standard. They're the same, right? Exactly the same, right?
The types, yes.
It's the type. So I'm still hoping that you could handle it the way it's working. What the service is going to be called. Right?
There's no way it could know that.
From Tomcat to the service.
It doesn't. I mean,
that's how the agent should know because you're handing it off.
no, because remember, the agent's using the type package. The value, Tomcat, is an argument. And it could change over time. I mean, in the next distro, it could change from, Tomcat to TC server or something like that.
Right.
But we wouldn't want to hard code that in our agent because then that tightly couples our agent with like every software package on the planet. What do they call the package? What do they call the service? What's their configuration file called? And all that other kind of stuff.
We still stuck with the case. That's what I'm getting.
For this type of thing, yes. Now.
But I'm going to go, add another platform. I got to go change it. How many times are you going to do it one time?
It tends to be somewhat of a one-time thing.
Platform or something. Your target.
Yeah. Now, there's a subtle distinction here. And I'm going to make something up. This type of thing. Imagine that we had, and I'm making this up. I think it's D port, but I don't remember. So,
the Unix version became Tomcat compliant.
yeah.
At one point, that's the standard, right?
Yeah, but that's not the case, though. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't have this problem. If it said it was positive. Yeah.
They don't have to follow it.
Now,
Ideal world.
so imagine that we have something like this. I want destination port for my Tomcat server. Okay, I want something like this. That is business data. In other words, I go to my new job and we run Tomcat on that port. So that's business data. It's not platform specific, it's the way I do things. Everybody with me on that so far? Okay? That's bad. So I don't want to put that in here. So what I do want to do is externally reference this information. In other words, I want to write my code in such a way that I'm not hemming myself into my current standards. I want to externalize the business data in something else and write my Puppet code in a way that will not need to change if I decide to run my servers on a different port or install things into a different path or have whatever, okay? So instead, we have this. Port. No, this is arbitrary what I call this. A way to externalize that information. We call it Hira. So now in my Puppet code, when this thing runs and it says, oh, I need to install Tomcat. When I configure it, I need to put it on the certain port. What is that certain port? Ask something else is the answer. Now under the covers, I configure this to ask the right place. Maybe it's a database. Maybe it's LDAP. Maybe it's YAML files, it's arbitrary where that something else is. Maybe it's a CMDB like a ServiceNow or something like that. Okay, but I can do that. So I've got a way to deal with both platform-specific differences. That's the params PP. We call that's the pattern. So if you Google Puppet params PP pattern, you'll see that's the way to do it. Business data, I keep that out by using this thing called Hira. Thoughts, questions? And I'm like, we're going straight to the weeds. So let me take it back up just a bit. So that was a component module. In other words, it knew how to do Tomcat. If I put that on a machine, it's probably not going to work because I need other things that make Tomcat work for me. So we call that composition of component modules a profile. So for instance, I've got this profile called Tomcat. This is me including that component that we just looked at. So this is a higher order of this is composition here. So I'm saying, first of all, make sure that a firewall is enabled. Okay. On Red Hat, that'll be IP tables. On Windows, that'll be Windows Firewall. On et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Make sure there's a firewall there. Include that component module I configured called Tomcat. By the way, make sure to pull in the right business data through Hira that I just configured so it's on the right port and it's installed at the right place and all that. Deploy these two applications, a docs and an admin app. And then, by the way, we need to open a port on the firewall. So we don't want to hard code that in here because that's business data. I want to do the same thing, Hira. Tomcat D port, I think I said. So now in two different places, I'm dereferencing the same information, so I can change it in one place and it reflects in all the right places. And here, now I can what we call classify, which is to say apply Puppet code to a node so that it sets up Tomcat in the way that I expect it to, which includes that there should be a firewall and a port should be open and these certain apps should be deployed and all the rest. So for instance, if I quit this, oh, it's bright. Okay, suddenly we have lights. So
the Hira keyword that you're using, the value you're using in code, you have used.
It's arbitrary.
Therefore, token that you use in the other file.
You would use the same name.
Okay, that we put that aside, like a subbing the value. Dollar sign.
Oh, yeah, you can. Totally, absolutely, totally. Yes, definitely. No question.
Somebody can stop it.
Yes.
One or two people.
Yeah. No, I mean, ultimately, absolutely, definitely. Now, everything we've been doing here is like about modules and manifests, and it's like the low level. It's the replacement for scripting. I'm about to segue into, okay, how do you take a node and apply that stuff? Okay, so this is more of the operator side of things. And if I were to say the other side would be more developer oriented. They're both operations sort of specific. Do you know what I mean? Like these are sysadmin kind of jobs. But this is less about how do I configure things and more about what do I want to configure. So what I'm going to say, when I log into this, this is just the portal. This is going to show me all the nodes that I've got currently checked in with the Puppet. In this case, I've just got a couple of machines, the master and the machine and the Cintas machine. I can see based on the last check-in, when did they check in, and when they checked in, did anything change, or were there errors, or did I run a simulation? Okay, that's what this graph means. Blue means change, green means didn't change, red means failed, etc. Now, classification is where I want to set up rules that say when a node checks in, consult these rules, figure out which group this node belongs to or groups, and then associate the right Puppet code. So for instance, and this is hierarchical, so you can see default is at the root. Here's, for instance, a set called Linux servers, which is a child of default. Okay, so if I look at Linux servers, I can see that there's two sides to this. The first side is rules that say who is a member of this group, and we use facts. Those are the same things that we did when we looked at OS family and OS. Those are facts. We say if the kernel is equal to Linux, and there's two of those, and when it's not the master. That's what this rule set says. And the grouping of this is in the and. So when both of these are true, I have what I call a Linux server, and then I can assign classification to it. So far, so good, or no?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is only available in
This is only available in Enterprise. That's right. I should mention that. Yeah. When you do this in Puppet open source, this part I'm doing now is done in Puppet code. You write manifest, specifically something called site PP and node PP. Okay. Now, so let's add some code to this. So, oh, I got profile Tomcat on here. Hold on a second. Make sure I didn't screw up my coup de grace. And that one's already there. I'm resetting. I did this demo before I came here. Sorry about that. Okay. I am, yes. Right now I am. No, not at all. Not at all. No, I'm using Vagrant just for, to sort of automate the environment, the images themselves for like, I've got an environment here where I can stand up Solaris or Ubuntu or Slez or whatever. But to configure all of them, I'm using Puppet. And Vagrant has a hook for provisioners, and Puppet's one of those provisioners. So Vagrant will stand up the box, and Vagrant will say, well, where do I get the box? I get it from out here, but configuring it, it'll run us as a provisioner. Yeah. I mean, you can also use like shell provisioners. So you can write shell scripts to automate the configuration of a Vagrant bus as well. So what I did was I just rolled back to a different snapshot of this image, and now I don't have Tomcat here. And what I was going to show you guys is, so I'm in that Linux group. I know that CentOS 65A box, which is this box I just rolled back, is in that group because it's not the master and its kernel is Linux. And now I can say, well, what classification do I want? I want it to be a Tomcat server. This is the module we just looked at. Okay, Tomcat server, add that. Now all of these have parameters, so I could specify a version. I could specify a different package name if I wanted to. Okay, or I could just use the defaults. Now as I make that change, I commit it. Now I can either wait for the agent to check in again, or I can kick it manually, which I will do. So Puppet agent is just saying, run the agent now, -T, out of band from the next scheduled interval. Now, remember that all I put, you saw, there's maybe 12 lines of Puppet code in there. This is going to go through. It's going to make sure IP tables is installed. It's running. It has the right rule. A JDK is present. Tomcat is there, and it's configured appropriately. The Docs app is deployed, and the admin app is deployed. And it'll take a second because it's like literally actually doing this stuff. And under the covers, it's doing it with, you know, Yum and everything else. Any making sense so far?
Yes.
Okay. So this will take just a second. Now, while that's running, actually, good segue back here. You know, one of the things as a side effect of Puppet that people like, a couple things, is the insight that you get. In other words, not just what happened. So in this case, change is happening. A bunch of stuff's getting installed and things are getting configured and whatnot. I need to know that happened. That's one thing. The second thing is that I made it happen. I made it happen by going into this node group and adding this class. And I logged in with my AD credentials or my LDAP credentials, and that's tracked by, under the covers, this activity monitoring service. So in this case, I can look at this. I can see over time who's been doing stuff in here and what have they been doing. So if you've got compliance sort of requirements or SARbox or something like that, and you need to know that, you can know that. Now you can see it in this interface or under the covers. All of the things you do in here, node classification, this activity tracking, in a minute I'll talk about role-based access control, etc., is all also accessible through services interfaces that are RESTful. So if I've got something like a cloud management product, or I've got a CMDB, or I've got some sort of custom portal that we've had around forever, and we want it to drive this instead of using this interface, I can do that. So those are all public interfaces. Okay, so this is almost done.
Is that only available for the enterprise?
Yes. Yes.
You are shell there, waiting to get to the next one to get to the first.
Oh, all I did was I didn't want to wait my agents are set to run every 30 minutes. So I wanted to make it run now. I could have done that either by waiting, or I can use this thing called live management, which is a way for me to centrally tell Puppet to run. Or I like to do this so people can see what's happening, like while it's happening. Make sense? And so that's why I did that. Now that's done. So it did all this stuff. Now when I go back here and go back to my nodes view, now I see change here, that's blue. It's hard to see. At least for me it is. If I drill into this guy, now I can see these are the reports of all the different times it's ran over the last whatever interval that this environment's been alive. I can drill into this. Some metrics around the run, like how long did it take? That one took 142 seconds, okay? Took 4.4 seconds to create the catalog. This log is the same thing I see out here. So it's the same thing, just sort of in the web interface. And then I can look at what we call events. So each line that you see out here is an event. An event is either something changed, something didn't change, something was simulated, or something had an error. And we sort them so that the changes go to the top. And so I can see that, this directory was created, these firewall rules were created, on and on and on. And I can see exactly which line of Puppet code caused that change to happen. So since my Puppet code is inside of version control, if I don't think that this should have happened, I can go into version control and essentially git blame, figure out who did that, and trace it back to the root cause. Make sense so far? Okay. When things change, let me see if I got an example of this. I don't. If files change, like config files, INI files, that sort of thing, comp files, if we change them, we persist the old values. So we can go in here and we actually have that old file, and it stays as part of the report. And then these reports, they can be exported to CSV. They can be, you can write your own report processors that push them out to Splunk or Logstash or something like that. Okay. The other thing is now we're looking at this from a node perspective. Okay. I might have hundreds or thousands of these nodes. That's kind of inefficient, hard for me to deal with that. So we have this idea called Event Inspector. This is also a Puppet enterprise-only thing. Let me make this a bigger interval. That allows me to look at events holistically, irrespective of node, and sort them by class, or by node, or by resource, and all the dispositions that exist: changed, not changed, error, or simulate. So I can say, show me classes where there were changes. These are the classes. You know, let's say, look at Java. Okay, there were 2 changes associated with Java, and they were on these 2 different nodes. Here's the one that we just did. It was added, and I can drill down to the very specific, like what module, what line of Puppet code changed it. I can go back up to a higher level and say, show me resources that have changed. Okay. There's so many of them. Somewhere in here there's package. Kind of doesn't matter. Here's a file change, changed on the master. Again, drill back down. So I can look at it by node, by class, by resource, and by disposition, and essentially drill back down into a root cause. Under the covers is a component called PuppetDB, which has its backing is Postgres. Yeah. Excuse me? Not as good as it could. Not as good as it could be. Like, for instance, what we'd like it to do is Splunk-like stuff, where you can sort of have an interface where you can go like, start doing regex type stuff. That's coming. That's coming. Okay. Last thing, last couple things I'll talk about. One is around discovery. This is a pull. So far, everything's about a pull. An agent's running on a node. The node checks in. The node describes itself to the master. The master sends back what it should look like, and the node enforces that. That's like a pull style of interaction. The other type is a push. What happens when I want to do discovery, like how many versions of OpenSSL am I running, and what are they? How many permutations of service count foo do I have, and what are they? And for that, we have this thing called live management. The component under the covers is called mcollective, and it's a pub sub style messaging, so we don't rely on SSH to talk to the nodes. The agents have a topic subscriber that's part of the agent, and that's regardless of what the platform is, and they just listen for events. And those events can be and the master produces these events. And the master might say, for instance, control Puppet. Maybe I want to say, this gentleman I think asked me, why did I SSH out to that machine? I didn't have to. I could have went here and said, for CentOS 65A, control Puppet, run, click run. Now a message has been put, now it's running Puppet right now, as opposed to me doing Puppet agent-t. And I can do this on a one-to-many basis. So I can say things like, I can say, again, facts, OS family, Red Hat. Now this is going to give me both of these same nodes. It's going to say, of all my nodes I've got, tell me all my Red Hat ones. All you guys run Puppet. That kind of thing. Or maybe I want to do discovery. Maybe all you guys tell me about what version of Bash you're running. So now in real time, it's going to go out there. Those guys are going to respond. I'm going to see that I've got 2 nodes. They're both running the same version of Bash. Okay. I can also have generic RPC. So I might have scripts that I've written that do whatever it is, sort of ad hoc sysadmin type things that I need done, whatever that might be. I can use Puppet to make sure the scripts are out there, and then I can use live management to invoke those scripts as I need. Again, on one-to-many basis, so I can multiplex that command out. It's like multiplexing SSH, but without the need for SSH.
I didn't know you were doing I didn't know. I thought you were involved. The RPC comes with its own idle.
This is a RPC in name only. So this, in other words, it's logically a remote procedure call. The communication technique being used. No, not at all. The last thing I'll mention is around access control. So the console here can be hooked up into into LDAP or Active Directory. Okay, so I've got this hooked up into Open LDAP, I think it is, and we'll delegate authentication to that. So as I log in here, I can log in, and my credentials, they don't get stored here. I just log in and get authenticated against my directory store. Same thing for user groups. So I think operations. Right here. That's what this is. Right. So this is like, where's my LDAP? What port's it on? What's my directory manager? Where are my groups? Where are my users? You know, all that kind of stuff. And then I've got user groups here, so I can import those as I need. We don't just snarf up every group that you have as I say I want it. This gets at operations. There is an operations group in LDAP, and I just pulled it in. And then I've got roles. So in this case, I've got a role that's called operations, and I can say, well, let's make LDAP group operations map to it, add that, commit that. Just like before, I have tracking here that says Dave just mapped the LDAP group operations to the group, the public group operations. Okay, and then for each of these, we have the membership portion of it, just like node groups. We have the membership portion, and then we have the what portion. In this case, the what for RBAC is what can they do. Okay, and so the what they can do, these are the different areas of Puppet and relative to security settings, node classification, access to the portal itself, user management, etc., and specific node groups. So for instance, earlier we had that Linux node groups. So maybe I have a group of Linux guys that are responsible for that. I can say for node group, they can, change parameterization for only the Linux servers, add that permission, and I can constrain people to only doing what they're allowed to do. Commit that change. Oh, this is a default group, so I picked the wrong group to do that with, but that's the general idea. So now when someone logs in that's an operator, they're not able to do things that they shouldn't be able to do. Any questions? Different. I mean, there's a lot of similarities where they differ. Chef is a very Ruby sort of experience. If you're a Ruby developer, you probably like that. If you're not a Ruby developer, you probably don't like it.
Can you show something that is one for development and for test and how does it propagate?
Say again, please.
Let's say you had a project that you moved from development to test and from test to production.
Mm-hmm.
And you show one item for your real project and what it looks like.
It is a little hard to show because what it boils down to is HIRA. So for instance, and this is extra credit if you're not interested, folks, but I'll show you. Here. So he's asking about when you're moving things from one environment to the next, like stage to prod or dev to test or something like that. What's that like? What's that look like? So okay. So I mentioned before where we had modules that for specific, when you think about the things that differ from one environment to the next, it's things like JDBC connection strings, VIPs, IP addresses, that kind of stuff. And in our modules, what we did was instead of putting that data in the module, we used that function call called HIRA. We said HIRA, Tomcat dport, for instance. Now, when I look at HIRA, thanks for coming, appreciate it. This is a kind of an advanced topic, so let me just try to describe this here. So Hiera means hierarchical, so it's a hierarchical lookup mechanism. And you can think about those calls, this is like a stack that's right here. So when I say Hiera Tomcat dport, Puppet's going to say, okay, I'm configured to first look for node-specific values that this client served. So in other words, like a node override. So my node's called, web, and I'm going to look at web.yaml in this case because the backend for this is called YAML, and the YAML files are stored here, and they're specific to a given environment, like prod or stage or dev. Okay? And then if I don't find a node-specific value, I look for, in this case, an environment-specific value, like a dev value. And that's going to match this. It's kind of like a fact. And if not there, I look for data center-specific value, and if not there, I look for global value. Now, these levels are completely arbitrary. I can have as many of them or as few of them. I can make them based on whatever value I want. But when I think about how do I move things from one environment to the next, it's the node that's checking in is going to be put into a specific environment, and the data associated with it is going to be placed in a specific place. Now, in this case, it's YAML, but your backend could be a database, in which case this ends up being a certain schema that you would consult. This is the production schema, this is the stage schema, this is the dev schema. So that's basically it. That's all I have to take in, I know. All right, well, I appreciate you guys having me.
It's your original question. You were talking about the difference between this and Jenkins.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's pretty clear the differences between the two.
Yeah, I think this is also what we keeping the environment library as my environment Vagrant just keeps track of and you know how to Jenkins whether it's supposed to continue development with it.
Right, but there is a natural hook between the two. I mean, so Jenkins is sitting there either doing like post-commit hook type, it's noticing a check-in or something and kicking off and building an application and everything, but then doing something with the app. And normally what it does is deploys it. The natural touch point is prior to deployment, kicking off Puppet and making sure that the target environment is correct to the application that you're about to push. So normally that's just done, like you just do that. But there's a natural place for Puppet to, as a step in the Jenkins workflow, first make sure that Puppet's running the application. And that might mean configuring the containers, baselining the OS, whatever. The room is electric.
I think, when this first came out, like, I think a really important concept, I never pronounced the word
I didn't pronounce it?
Yeah, I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And
You got to say it like 5 times.
yeah, it's got, definitely drunk of it. But that's a really important concept when it first came out because essentially what it means is that a machine can be converged in a specific state every time. And when you're doing like software development, it's a very important concept when you, because basically you want to be building on a systems production like once you kind of model the system in a tool like something like Chef, you can actually reproduce that system dev, test, QA state, and you can always bring it to an exact consistent state as well. And a lot of this new stuff actually I've seen in enterprise is pretty new to me, but basically, when I was using it a while back, we kept everything in version control. So as you make changes, you can actually convert your system back to a particular revision based on putting your source code management. So it's really some important concepts that kind of bridge between software development and also system administration. A lot of those concepts that people be doing in software development around
what are you guys doing next time around?
Next time around, we've got New Relic. So, New Relic, yeah, do you want to know New Relic yet?
Yeah.
Okay, so New Relic are, they're in the application performance management space. Basically, they have a tool that will, basically, after you deploy an application, it will look at performance of the application. So, if it's Java app, debug the Java app, look at all the various I will give you all sorts of different metrics on the performance of the application. And it kind of ties into that kind of DevOps flow. So once you've got something deployed, you can actually see the metrics of that deployment. So you can see if it's actually performing better, or there's certain points in your code where there's suboptimal. So basically, it's a application performance analysis, and it kind of ties into DevOps, so you can actually see, once you've got things deployed, how to perform.
What was the name you said?
New Relic.
New Relic. Is it like Spring Insight?
They do. So it's cross-platform. So it's not just Java. They do.
Does it compete with Foglight?
Foglight and Dynamics.
Yeah.
Those kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they're pretty.
They're very high.
Yeah, a pretty new company, very hot, and I think it would be a good presentation.
Maybe just this week, our company, we just want to ComputeWare for Dynamics.
Sure.
It was part of CE ComputeWare.
Right.
And they spin it out, and now it's a separate company. So that seems to be very popular. How long have you been running this?
This is our second one.
This was the
So and we're going to grow. So hopefully we get some more. We get some more members and more topics. So I'd like to come again at some point and actually make this a regular group. Yeah, so we have to talk there. So if you guys are interested, we would like to do at least a puppet using conference more regularly.
Mm-hmm.
If that's okay with you.
I mean, I need to get one going up here.
Okay.
Because
What was your previous one?
Previous one was it was back in December, was it? Yeah, it was in December, and it was actually held at the Sheraton. And basically, I was kind of reaching out to see if there was interest in doing a DevOps user group. But this location, Improving Enterprises, they provide a location in Houston as well, which I've been using for 6 to 7 months. And they provide everything, the food, the drink, and they do this for other user groups as well. So it's kind of natural for us to come use it.
There's the DevOps user group downtown.
Oh yeah, so those are that's the DevOps live, isn't it? I haven't
No,
been
maybe
doing those.
they started in December or January,
Sure.
then they had the doctor and they first.
Yeah, I know there is another one in town. My take on that was that they were a recruiting company, and they were, there's a lot of recruiters that do this. It's hard to get hold of DevOps people.
Yeah.
So they actually hold these user groups, and they get DevOps.
Yeah, kind of vibe I got when I was in there.
Yeah.
It was like, did you go there? No.
My take for this was totally different. Basically, my background is system engineering. I've kind of been in DevOps space for a long time. Actually, I do the same job as Nathan. I'm a solution architect, and I basically go around, show people how DevOps works and stuff like that.
So many already. It's not possible that you can pick and master all these things.
There's a lot of marketing involved in DevOps.
Yeah, you think?
So everyone tries. Well, there's a lot of companies that say they do go DevOps.
Can I throw a couple of quick things out that I was sort of blanking on from a DevOps community perspective? So DevOps Days is a big thing that comes around once a year. Last year was here in Dallas. Did you go to that, or did you?
I went to year before.
Okay. This year it's in Austin. I think it's in May. You have to look it up, DevOps Days. It's like a one-day trade show. Very small scale. There's probably 15 exhibitors, a lot of community content, probably 50-50, something like that. You know, we'll be there, Chef will be there, Ants will be there, Rackspace, like all the people, you know, Elasticsearch is there, that kind of Splunk, etc. That's DevOps Days. Puppet has a users group in Austin. We're trying to start one here. Don't have it yet. But then we also have these things called Puppet camps. Just like DevOps Days, they come around once a year in each territory. This year, the Puppet camp is in Austin on the 10th of next month. And it's a one-day trade show, Puppet only, Puppet community provided content like 80%, 90%. So at this year, it's ERCOT, let me think about this. ERCOT, HomeAway, City of Austin, basically come in and say, this is how, whatever it is they want to present, you know. Here's how we spend our first year learning Puppet. Here's whatever it is, community content, but it's to meet other people that are doing Puppet for one thing. So that's, if you want to go to that, that's on the 10th of next month. That's in Austin. And then it's called Puppet Camp. So if you just, it's super cheap, you know, free food. I think we do free drinks. I mean, it's, and if you really need a ticket, let me know. I can get you a ticket. The other thing about Puppet, and you mentioned like, so there's all this stuff with DevOps, or one of you guys said like, well, you can't know it all. Like, how do you get to know it all? This is an interesting thing. This is from Dice.com, fastest growing tech skills. And when you look at this, you expect to see things like big data, like thematic type things. And this is not us, but number one skill, Puppet, like with a bullet. I don't think you can see that. So if you're looking to spice up your resume, put Puppet on it. And trust me, it's a high demand skill, because when that guy came in, the guy that was sort of kicking us off, my first thought was, do you guys know people that know Puppet? Because I can't even, like my job, when I sell it so much that I can't, our backlog on professional services is crazy. It's as much as 13 and 15 weeks, because that's how much demand there is. Because everyone's getting on this DevOps bandwagon, and you can't get into DevOps and not know Puppet. Puppet's like Kleenexes to tissue. Like, that's DevOps to most people. So they'll look at least Puppet and Chef, and then some.
Most people who are myself got some pages running up and they really use Puppet kind of thing because their language and all those things. I'm just thinking, most people now want to go to the cloud.
Yeah, but that's what drives more Puppet adoption. I want to start spinning up lots of images in EC2. I still want to baseline them. I want to set them up with what, you know, I want to do elastic scaling. That's like everyone's nirvana. So I want, you know, big catalog season, you know, scale out. Okay, it's over, scale down. You have to have something like Puppet to do that. You can't do that without Puppet or something like Puppet.
Well, it should.
Exactly. That's the number one driver of something like Puppet.
They have their own tools to make it.
No, they don't. What is it?
So you find some of those tools are actually public.
Yeah.
I know that Anderson, DevOps tool, based on Chef.
Yeah. Rackspace is based on Chef.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, they advertise, hey, our stuff works with Puppet. Yeah, so
Yeah.
because they know that, okay, this is our space. We make the things, we put stuff on, but here's the things that work with this stuff.
Yeah. You go to VMware and you have something like VCAC, it delegates to Puppet. You go to Dell, they bought in Stratius, they call it Dell Multi-Cloud Manager, it delegates to Puppet. You go to Dell, you go to Active Systems, that's your private cloud, it delegates to Puppet. You maybe don't think it's Puppet, but it's Puppet. Or Chef, I mean, it could be Chef too. Chef's absolutely in there. And it's not like Puppets, if you like Chef, you know, go with God. But one of those things, like Chef, Puppet, you're going to have something like that if you're doing DevOps.
So if you learn Puppet, did you pick up a Chef or?
say they're pretty different. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're a Ruby,
It's what you say, like, in your background, so I was
yeah.
Puppet was really easy. The way it worked, the mask, basically have mask, have instruments and shit, I just could not get into it.
But some people will have the opposite reaction
Right, exactly.
because they are Ruby people. They come in from a strong Ruby background and they like that programmatic. Ours is more declarative. Theirs is more programmatic.
Also, your declarative, it reminds me of Vagrant. Like you had ends, you have farm, and now the industry wanted to develop software trying to move to Cradle, which is more also declarative and it's written in Ruby, so it was kind of easy for me to pick up just that declarative language. And my question I had for you was, someone mentioned about Dockers. And what would be the difference for Docker, Chef, and Docker?
That's a real hot topic.
Are they all bumping?
So I think you say, it really depends. So a lot of people say if you are Docker, inside of Docker, you don't have the need for configuration management because inside of Docker, meaning you're at the process level, you're running your JVM or your web, whatever, inside of a Docker container. It's like inside of it, it's a single process, but you have Puppet outside that process managing Docker itself. That's one mode of thought. However, it's freaking so new and so few people are really like using Docker and containers in general that it's not shaking out like what's the right mix. Does one obviate the other? What's the right combination of the two? You could talk to 100 people and get a lot of different opinions on that.
Yeah, there's a GitHub group called I'm very interested.
Yeah, they were here last week.
And now you got alternative Docker. I mean,
yeah. So the thing about that is talking about standards.
yeah.
So they're trying to develop the community-centric standard around what does that container look like and how it would work with configuration. What it should limit itself to based on the Linux model. Do this thing really well. So if you want to kind of explore into the whole world.
Yeah, but I don't think that's separate, right? But even they are trying to get into the Docker mode and say it's a standard. But he was saying that the Docker is not the full request is still pending for them. So that's from their side they're saying it's standard. So the Docker side they haven't standardized.
But that's if you actually look at Docker is taking this notion of okay, we're going to do that. So it doesn't have a trick line. So it's interesting. It's just it. And that's, going back to my days of Earth. We thought, we're developing deployment for applications, and we'll just work with the public lab guys, and they'll handle the infrastructure provisioning and setting up the middleware. But it's like, well, where do you draw that line? And some part is on the way, too far this way, some far this way, according to the higher ups.
Yeah.
So that doesn't happen. But anytime you're talking about new technology, really get solid adoption. Exciting.
The other thing I'll say for your group here, because I run a public group in Austin, and it's kind of tough. I mean, how you're doing it in 2 cities, I don't know. Is like if you guys need to come with some content. If you just keep having vendors coming through here, it gets kind of old, kind of quick because we're a step removed from the day-to-day realities that so I would press hard on you guys, like if you've got interest, you've done some cool stuff, and maybe you don't think it's like awesome revolutionary DevOps stuff, but it's like sort of in that vein, or you're struggling with a problem, present the problem. Like the end of this meeting is more interesting than the whole rest of the meeting, in my opinion. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, I agree.
As opposed to someone just talking to you, like workshopping things, those are make for a much more interesting, compelling reason to come.
And the reason I'm interested in that is because I joined a group and I joined a company and I'm building the environment from scratch. It didn't have continuous environment. The software is there, but I still need to set up all the continuous environment, Jenkins and all that. So basically, I'm trying to get an idea how I could easily implement it with a short amount of time that you have in a day. And when I look at this, it's kind of going to give me a hint. Because easily set up this business environment. And also there's some other environment I need to set up just as a lab for my developers to kind of play around until they have a proof of concept.
Well, anybody can go download this for free. You can use it into perpetuity for 10 licenses. So if you've got some small little environment, and you can use full Puppet Enterprise forever for free. Just download it. There's also a learning VM. You can download that.
Puppet is the process that runs the thread. It should be run on the root and on root. You need to somehow make it to run, right? So the installation should require some permission to install it, right?
If you install it as root, yeah.
I do all sorts of terrible things with Puppet because we don't have root access anywhere. We're actually not allowed to use masturation communication at all. So we run master with Puppet for everything. So what is that to say to pick off the
So let's say it's a lot of wants to run. And you think Puppet is like a package there or
right. So
how do you get Puppet?
I've done terrible things with Jenkins and Maven to compile Ruby and then use Ruby sitting off of its own directory or something. And then gem install and have another package that has all my Puppet binaries laid out. I'm just unzipping things, setting gem home running. So, but it works. I mean, but it's, you know.
But you still install Puppet as root. And I don't know, I assume you guys do that, right? It's installed running as non-root, or you installed it as non-root too? How did you install it?
Yeah, how do you install?
Oh, you're doing it through gems. Okay. So they're doing it through Ruby gems, which you can do in your own, like as a regular user. So you're, okay, yeah, obviously Puppet open source. Yeah.
So,
good, and then it's just a limitation of our environment.
Yeah.
well, I saw some concepts like a package manager, right? So RPM, the package manager.
Yeah.
You had something in it to list out what are all the modules that got installed with Puppet, right? What do you call that?
An environment.
Right, but what is that? Something is keeping track of all the modules, right?
So we have something that's called R10K.
R10K.
Yeah, it stands for Robot Chicken 10,000. And it, seriously, thanks for coming. I got to go. Appreciate it. And if you, feel free to call me anytime. Sure. I'm always out here, so.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Throw that where the trash. But it'll basically synchronize by the Git. That's our preferred, version control system. So it'll synchronize your modules that are in Git. Each branch in Git, or you can use labels as well, equals an environment. So I can have a branch for production, a branch for test, a branch for dev, and that will become my master repository. We use this thing called Puppet file, which is kind of common. Vagrant uses Vagrant file. We use Puppet file. It's just an enumeration of all the modules, where to get them, and what versions, and so R10K reads that Puppet file, pulls them from the Forge or from GitHub or from a private CS, and puts them into the appropriate environment on all my masters. Or you said masterless, or wait, who said you? Or in a masterless environment, you could run R10K on individual nodes. And masterless just means all those modules are everywhere that Puppet's running, as opposed to the master model where they're only on the master. Yeah. Cool. Anyway, my cards are right up here if anybody wants them.
All right.
Thanks for coming. I'll bore people all day long.
So when you're going to your CFC, it was additional reading.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. You're totally the